Hello, and welcome to the Thyroid Warrior podcast. I'm Ebony, and I'm here as your wellness facilitator. I'm going to be sharing my experiences in managing Hashimoto's disease. I really hope that it'll help you on your personal journey. Keep in mind, however, this does not substitute for medical advice. It is only for your information and motivational purposes only. Now, let's get started.
Hello friends, we are back. So last week we started talking about the hypothalamus and how that impacts our overall health and the functions of what it does. So if you didn't catch that episode, definitely go back and listen. But this week we're going to talk about the pituitary gland as well as the pineal gland. And it's very important that I break this down because so many of the episodes that I've talked about before hopefully will make so much more sense, because this set of episodes gives you an understanding about why food is important, why movement is important, and what we can do to really and truly support our bodies as well as our thyroid gland. So we are going to start by talking about the pituitary gland first, and then we'll talk about the pineal gland. And that particular gland is connected to the hypothalamus, and that is going to stimulate the release of hormones, as we know, but it releases hormones that are related to growth. And it has two basic lobes, so to speak. So it's the anterior, which means the front, and the posterior, which means the back. So when you think about the anterior pituitary gland, it releases several hormones that we are very familiar with. And it literally releases 6 major hormones. And when I started just going back into this, because I'm always trying to make sure I'm brushing up on things, because I want to make sure I'm giving you the most relevant information, my mind was blown again. I will be saying that a lot. No pun intended, since we are talking about the brain. But let's talk briefly about the hormones that the anterior pituitary gland releases. The first is our growth hormone. Now, the hypothalamus, which I shortened in the last episode, but it releases the growth hormone releasing hormone, but then your anterior pituitary gland releases the growth hormone. Just the growth hormone. And basically that hormone itself is going to stimulate the growth of bone, muscle, and what's called visceral tissue. So we have to be careful, because it does not stimulate the growth of your brain and your gonads or sex organs. So I just wanted to make sure we kind of separate that out. But your growth hormone is going to be very important between, I would say, the ages of about 2-ish to 16. So anytime you're at your pediatrician's office and you're thinking through, okay, what are some important things to consider? That is definitely one of those hormones. And remember, after about, I would say, 12 weeks or so, your baby is going to start producing its own thyroid hormones. So that's also something that's really important to keep in mind too. While a lot of the papers that I've read and doctors that I've spoken to say that you're not necessarily born hypothyroid, but you definitely want to make sure that, obviously we're eating well, we're making sure that we're buying organic when possible and when we can afford it. We're making sure that we're getting enough rest ourselves. Like, there are a lot of things that we can do from an environment perspective to influence that particular hormone in our bodies in general. Then our anterior pituitary gland produces the hormone that many of us are so familiar with, and that is our thyroid stimulating hormone. That is going to stimulate our thyroid glands to produce and secrete our T4 and our T3. And it also regulates so many things, from our metabolism to just basic cardiovascular function. Then we have our adrenal corticotropic hormone. That is a mouthful, but it's ACTH for short, and that's going to stimulate your adrenal cortex. So think about your kidneys. If you place the palm of your hand on your back, your lower back, that is where your kidneys, or if you place both palms, I should say, on your lower back, that's where your kidneys are. And the little triangular shaped organ or gland that sits on top of your kidneys is your adrenal cortex. So that hormone is going to stimulate that gland to produce your glucosteroids. So that is your hydrocortisone or your cortisol. So that is your stress hormone. Then we have to think about our follicle stimulating hormone. And in women, we know that this is going to be involved in the growth and secretion of our follicles from an ovary perspective. But in men, that is going to stimulate the production of sperm. And it basically promotes the secretion of our sex steroids, or hormones, so to speak. So we have our estrogen, our progesterone, and our testosterone. So when you're thinking about the different phases in your cycle, this hormone is going to, along with the luteinizing hormone, which I'll talk about next, those are often playing in concert with progesterone and your estrogen during your menstrual cycle. So speaking of luteinizing hormone, that's what we're going to talk about next. And that's basically what stimulates ovulation and estrogen. So in terms of what's called your corpus luteum, so that mass of cells, or the corpus luteum, is also going to have a role in whether or not fertilization occurs. So you definitely want to just kind of pay attention to that, especially as you're trying to get pregnant. Talk to your doctor about those various hormone levels in your body to make sure you have an optimal environment, so to speak, in terms of getting pregnant, or if you're struggling with fertility issues, that's also something to just kind of pay attention to. And then we have our prolactin, and that is what's going to stimulate your milk production as well as secretion. And then in men, that actually supports the regulation of the male reproductive system. And it really also works in our kidneys to regulate water and electrolyte balance. So remember when I was talking about your hypothalamus and how many things it controls, and even from a thyroid perspective, it's your master organ. It really and truly is something to just be in awe of, because there are so many things that your endocrine system is doing just to keep us alive. And when it's out of whack, it really does do a number on us, as we've read/heard about. And even in this episode, look at all those different hormones that our pituitary gland controls. And now I'm going to talk about our posterior pituitary hormones, and it's two there. And it's our antidiuretic hormone. And obviously that one is going to stimulate your kidneys to retain water, or less water, as we know, is excreted in our urine. But anytime we have a lower or decreased amount in the water in our blood, and when you think about this, that's going to happen anytime, let's say, we have dehydration or we're sweating a lot. That particular hormone is going to be released to kind of bring those water levels back up, so that our bodies don't end up getting really dehydrated. So it's really important to make sure that you're paying attention to those signs. And unfortunately, many of us live in a constant state of dehydration, so it's going to be really, really important to make sure that we're helping our bodies as much as possible to stay hydrated and to maintain that healthy lifestyle, so that we can help our bodies function as optimally as it can. And lastly, we have oxytocin. So again, whenever you're in labor, that oxytocin is going to stimulate contractions. Oftentimes you'll see the bag of oxytocin hung, or your lactated ringers, or all those things, it's going to also stimulate your glands in your breasts for milk production, particularly when you are lactating. And again, it also kind of stimulates that maternal instinct. So I've heard a lot of times with my friends right before they gave birth, they were like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. I'm scared. I don't know. And then as soon as the baby is kind of placed on their chest, it's like, it's just a light switch. Like, they got it. And I think that is so beautiful. I think it's really and truly amazing. And one day I hope to have that experience, but it's definitely something that I think that we really and truly should learn about and understand. And really, guys, this doesn't just relate to women. Men can also have a lot of hormone imbalances as well, because as we've learned, our hormones can impact men as well. And I've also worked with clients that are men that do have hypothyroidism or even Hashimoto's disease. And I just want you to have the knowledge and the information so that you can develop that awareness in order to be more knowledgeable about what's going on. Because what often happens, as many of you know, is when you go to the doctor and you're like, you know what, I'm kind of off, I'm not really sure what's going on. You may, in fact, if you're lucky, just have a TSH done. But you need to look into all of your lab values to have a more complete picture of what's actually happening in your system. And this is why I went in depth in this in my thyroid guide. And it's really, really important for you to know about your vitamin B, A, C levels, your vitamin D, which our bodies do not make vitamin D at all, not even a little bit. We have to get it from the food that we eat or the sun. And it's very important that you pay attention to those levels, because even when you look at your A1C, that tells what's going on with your red blood cells over a 3-month time period. And it's really important to get tested often, especially when you're new to things, to understand what is going on. And this is another reason why I talk to you about our macro and micronutrients, so that you have an understanding of the various foods, micronutrients, meaning your vitamins, your minerals, and all those things, because in this way, your brain is helping your body to figure out how to keep it managed and regulated. So when you have deficiencies in these various items, it ultimately affects your brain's ability to regulate those levels of said vitamins, minerals, fat, water-soluble vitamins, etc. So it's so important to have that complete picture and understand what's going on from a top-down approach. So speaking of vitamin D, let's talk about the pineal gland, which, oddly enough, it was named as such because it's kind of shaped like a pine cone. So the next time you're outside and you're going for a walk and you pick up a pine cone, that's what your pineal gland looks like. So it has 2 functions. The first is to help to maintain your circadian rhythms. Hello, if you have insomnia, or if you've ever taken melatonin, this is where your pineal gland comes into play. The second function is to, again, just regulate different reproductive hormones. So just like we were looking at our pituitary gland and it producing our luteinizing hormone and our follicular stimulating hormone, well, when you have, which a lot of research is still going on in terms of understanding what your pineal gland does, but let's talk about your circadian rhythm, and then we'll talk about its relationship to those 2 hormones that I just mentioned. So when we think about your circadian rhythm, that is your basically a 24-hour time cycle, so to speak. So when you're asleep and when you're awake. And that's why I have to be very careful when I have light blocking curtains, because they also throw off my circadian rhythms, and I never know what time it is, and it kind of scares me, honestly. But it helps because I have a really bright light outside of my window, and it's hard for me to fall asleep and get that melatonin production going because I have a super bright light out my window. Here's why that's important. So when you have light exposure or any bright lights, or let's say you sleep with the light on in your room, that actually stops the release of melatonin. I'll say that again. If you have light exposure or light in your room, or if you, let's say, you are in a super bright room, you're reading, you're playing games, you're on your computer, and then you think that you're going to fall asleep, no, you're not. Because your body is like, oh, wait, there's light, I can be awake. So that is going to have a direct impact on whether or not you're sleeping well. And then when you have your melatonin secretion, so it's going to be low during the day and it'll be high at night. So remember, and this is also another reason why we also tend to get really tired and sleepy and depressed in the wintertime, because melatonin production starts to get increased during the wintertime too, because it gets dark earlier. So it's going to be really kind of problematic for us, which again, daylight savings time is great, but it's really confusing as well. But melatonin is going to block the secretion of the luteinizing hormone and follicular or follicle stimulating hormone. So those hormones are really, really important for our reproductive systems. So I'll say that again. When we have an increase in melatonin, it blocks the secretion of our luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormones. So what does that mean, Ebony? Well, if you have too much melatonin being secreted in your body, it is going to decrease the production of these hormones that are very, very important for our overall health. And your periods begin to become irregular. In men, their sex hormones become interrupted. And even when we think about just estrogen and progesterone in general, that also kind of just throws our bodies off. And if, let's say, you have insomnia or you're having trouble sleeping, or even during the day, especially if your work schedule is kind of off, that is going to play a large role in that hormone production. So it's really, really important that we set the stage for our bodies in terms of preparing it for sleep. So I really wanted to make sure I said that, because when you're not sleeping well, when you're not taking care of your body in that way, and sometimes we don't have a choice because we're taking care of someone else, we got to get the kids to bed, we got to do all these things, I get it. But if you can start the practice of setting up a routine where you start to reduce the amount of light in your room, where you're not looking at electronics maybe an hour to 2 hours before bed, that is going to really have a great impact on your sleep and your overall health. And if, let's say, winding down 2 hours in advance isn't going to work for you, what are some strategies that you have used in the past that have helped you fall asleep? For me, I start to diffuse essential oils about an hour before I go to bed, and that significantly helps me, because that now is my mind's trigger to say, wait a minute, it's time to start getting ready for bed. Or I'll take a shower at night to make sure that I get my body in that routine. So what are some strategies that you can implement to help you to wind down at night? What are some strategies that you can use with your family, with your children? I know when I had my nephew, and even when I have my niece or my goddaughter, we start to, well, not so much so with my goddaughter because she just takes the markers and draws over the walls. But with my goddaughter, we start to color at night. And that's just kind of helping her to calm down from running around and doing all the things. So I just want to encourage you to start thinking about that. Or even when I had my nephew and we were talking, we would reflect on the day, and I would talk to him about what work he was doing. And for some odd reason, when he was talking about schoolwork, it made him sleepy. So what are some of those things that you can do? And I know we cover a lot in this episode, but don't worry. At the end of this, you are going to have a nice little workbook to help you kind of walk through this. So this is really your introduction, and then you will have supplemental information for you at the end of this. But we talked about the hypothalamus. We talked about the pituitary gland. We also spoke about your pineal gland, and we are actually going to finish our conversation with talking about the thyroid gland, but I'm also going to throw in our adrenal glands as well, because that's very important, and we've kind of referenced those throughout the last 2 episodes. And then we're going to tie everything back together. So with that, be happy, be whole, and be well. Take care.
Okay, thyroid warriors, get out there and take things one step at a time. Remember, be great, reflect on your triumphs, and as always, be well. Take care.